Every single Pokemon has weaknesses, obviously. It's kind of fundamental to the design and balance of the games. The type system exists to give Pokemon targetable weaknesses, specific types that deal more damage to them. And there are some examples of Pokemon that actually don't have any type weaknesses, like Sableye before the Fairy type was introduced. But Sableye has weaknesses in a broader sense. It has low stats, it is limited. It can be broken through by powerful neutral damage. So Pokemon having weaknesses is nothing special. Even Mega Rayquaza has weaknesses, and that's possibly the best Pokemon ever created. But there are some Pokemon with such significant drawbacks, such significant weaknesses, that it seems as if them being viable in any competitive context is impossible. Overcoming their weaknesses is just too much of a hurdle. And yet, amazingly, there are examples of Pokemon with weaknesses that seem absolutely catastrophic, that find a place to exist in competitive play regardless, against the odds. Why don't we explore some examples of that? Pokemon that overcome incredible drawbacks to find some competitive success. First, we have a Pokemon with an incredibly famous weakness, one of the most debilitating weaknesses a Pokemon has in the whole series, and that is Slaking. Slaking has the ability Truant, which is an active disadvantage. Truant is an ability that causes Slaking to skip every other turn instead of using a move. So every other turn, Slaking will be completely inactive. This ability and this drawback to Slaking is absolutely terrible. And Slaking is designed with this in mind, of course, because if you look at Slaking's stats, they are outstanding. They are on the quality of box legendaries. Absolutely incredible HP and attack, and even an impressive base 100 speed and good defensive stats too. But Truant is such a drawback, such a detriment, that not even those stats can save this Pokemon. In most generations, Slaking is completely unviable. The move Protect destroys Slaking's entire career because you can simply Protect every single time they try to attack you. On the next turn, they can't do anything. Making yourself inactive is so bad because Pokemon Singles is a game that's all about gaining free turns. Everyone's trying to gain free turns, whether it's through putting the enemy to sleep, trying to freeze them, paralyzing them, trying to flinch them. Getting free turns is one of the best things you can do. Slaking offers free turns to the enemy on a silver platter. Every second turn, you're doing nothing. It's such an inherent disadvantage that the Pokemon is, in most contexts, just not worth using. And it certainly doesn't help that a mono-normal typing has just gotten worse and worse over time. There was a period where such a typing was acceptable, even good, but in modern games it's not the case. Normal is a pretty terrible typing with few advantages. But there was a time when Slaking actually was okay competitively. Calling it good is a stretch, but amazingly, despite its incredibly exploitable mechanic that leaves it helpless in so many contexts, in Generation 3 OU, Slaking is occasionally used by high-level players. Back in Gen 3, the team preview mechanic was not implemented in the games yet. I'm sure you're all familiar with team preview if you play modern Pokemon. When you start a game, you can see the enemy's entire team and they can see your team, and with this information, you choose a lead out of your 6 Pokemon and they do the same. So there's a bit of control even on the first decision of the game. Back in the old games, this was not the case. Both of your teams are hidden from each other, and the Pokemon that you lead with is actually locked in blind. You don't have any information about the enemy team. When you're selecting your lead, you just lead off with the first Pokemon in your team's order. It's not a decision you get to make. Obviously, this leads to a very different gameplay experience, because at the start of the game, you don't know what Pokemon they have. You have to guess what they have based on information that you gain over time, and sometimes you make plays to reveal such information. But this also has a significant impact on the lead metagame. The Pokemon that players choose to lead with are greatly impacted by the fact that it is a blind decision, and you cannot choose a different lead if you see a bad lead matchup in the team preview. There is no team preview. For this reason, you want to lead with a Pokemon that is consistent, that has good matchups against a bunch of stuff, and starts the game off with some sort of advantage, whether that be directly threatening multiple possible things, making hazards like spikes to start the game off with an early advantage, or maybe doing some sort of setup like substitute and baton pass to safely switch into an ally. One of the most common leads in Gen 3 is just Tyranitar because it has a lot of vast options, it can be multiple different sets, it has pretty good matchups across the board, and it makes sand on the field instantly, which usually will benefit you and hinder the enemy. Another common lead is Zapdos, who is fast, threatening, and has tools like Baton Pass, Substitute, and Thunder Wave to cripple enemies. Salamence is a common lead as well, as it has Intimidate to lower the enemy's attack on turn 1, and its own set of wide options to threaten a wide array of things. In this environment where leads are locked in, and usually see similar leads in most games, Slaking is actually a little bit of a disruptive Pokemon. Because Slaking is kind of perfect to be a blind lead in Gen 3. Slaking's 100 base speed means that it at least matches the speed of many common leads including Zapdos and Salamence. With its good HP and defenses, it can stomach most incoming hits, and with its fantastic physical move pool, it can threaten almost everything in the game potentially. A Tyranitar lead gets one hit KO'd by Earthquake. Zapdos will get devastated by Return or Double Edge. And even Skarmory doesn't love taking a huge Focus Punch, which will almost KO it. Slaking also has the capability of threatening possible switch-ins. Focus Punch deals incredible neutral damage to many defensive walls that might want to come in to stomach the hit. A Pokemon with Protect probably wants to come in, maybe Metagross or Jirachi. They get devastated by Earthquake. Yes, Gengar is immune to normal and fighting type attacks and ground type attacks, but Slaking can carry Shadow Ball to eliminate a Gengar immediately. Gengar has no chance of surviving that. It's also not that common to have Protect on a lead Pokemon, because most lead Pokemons are trying to run movesets that do as much as possible. Protect is an inherently passive move that you're usually going to use on a defensive switch-in, someone that wants to chip peel or scout information. Your lead Pokemon is usually going to run a bunch of attacks, setup moves, utility like spikes, and those sorts of things. The only common lead that really runs Protect is Skarmory. But Skarmory is wary to select Protect on turn 1 because that would allow Magneton to come in and trap it without any downside. Skarmory most of the time is going to choose to make spikes because at least in the event of a Magneton trap they've gotten some value. Clicking Protect on turn 1 with Skarmory is incredibly dangerous, especially if you see a Slaking in front of you who is a common teammate for Magneton. So on turn 1 of the game, Slaking is kind of ignoring its Truant ability, since nothing can really afford to take advantage of it by protecting. Slaking is widely threatening to just about everything, and in most cases it's going to force the enemy into a terrible position right off the bat, and a position where they have to take a huge hit, and that hit can determine the course of the game. I mean, if you deal 90% to an incoming Skarmory or a Milotic, there's little chance of coming back from such a thing. That's a devastating blow. And what if Slaking gets a direct KO on turn 1? What if it just gets an immediate advantage? Slaking can be used later on in the mid-game too, as you can switch out and back in to avoid Truant occurring. But the key here is that the Gen 3's lead metagame as well as the no team preview mechanic just lend themselves well to Slaking and give Slaking an opportunity to immediately overcome its greatest weakness. In a world with team preview, you can just see that the enemy has a Slaking and there's no being caught off guard by it. You can go to something with Protect and cover the Slaking matchup. Bringing Slaking onto the field and putting it in a position where it can get value is way more difficult in later games because of this. But in Gen 3, Slaking is in a rare position to actually work pretty well as an aggressive anti-meta lead. Now, Slaking does have its problems. You are kind of gambling here. What if you click Earthquake and they don't go to a Steel type, they go to Gengar? Well, now you've kind of lost all momentum. You don't necessarily have enough info on turn 1 to know what they're going to go into, but There is still value in forcing the enemy out on turn 1 and making things awkward for them. You're also gaining information in the worst case, so I think Slaking is quite a good lead in Gen 3, and it's interesting the way that it is able to overcome such a glaring weakness. My next example of a Pokemon that is able to overcome glaring weaknesses is another one from Gen 3, and that is Camerupt. When you look at Camerupt, it tells a tragic story. Yes, every Pokemon has weaknesses, but the deck was really stacked against Camerupt in so many ways. Camerupt is a fire ground type Pokemon, meaning it is ×4 weak to water and weak to ground, which are some of the most common attacking types in the game. It has this glaring defensive typing and also pretty terrible stats that don't really serve to make up for these shortcomings very much. It only has 70 in its HP and physical defense and 75 special defense, which is just not much. This is the stat distribution of like a fast offensive threat that's supposed to be frail. And then you look at Camerupt's speed and it's only 40, so it has the worst of all worlds. A bad defensive typing, poor defensive stats, and low speed. So what does Camerupt have going for it? Well, I suppose it has mixed attacking stats, 100 physical attack and 105 special, which aren't very good, but they're okay. All this is bad enough, but Camerupt is also suffering from the fact that in Gen 3, Dugtrio is a completely legal Pokemon to use, usually banned in competitive, but legal in Gen 3, and Dugtrio can just trap Camerupt and KO it instantly with an Earthquake. And Dugtrio is not even really trying to target Camerupt. That Earthquake is more for meta Pokemon like Jirachi, Metagross, Tyranitar. So Camerupt isn't even really doing anything wrong, but it's been caught in the crossfire of a Pokemon that exists to eliminate other fellas, which is one of the worst things for a Pokemon trying to exist competitively, is that if you have the same weaknesses as a popular Pokemon, so a bunch of teams are just going to run counterplay to you even though you're some random nobody like Camerupt. So how could Camerupt overcome all of these dreadful weaknesses? Well, Camerupt's fire ground typing does have a silver lining. There is some advantage to this. There is nothing else in the game with this typing in Gen 3, and it's interesting because Camerupt has some valuable immunities. Fire typing means you are immune to being burned, which is useful against Gengar, who commonly carries Will-O-Wisp. Camerupt is of course a ground type, meaning it is immune to electric type attacks, which is wonderful against Gengar as well, who commonly carries Thunderbolt, and it's useful against Zapdos and Jolteon, who are meta Pokemon. And the real beauty of Camerupt is the fact that it is a ground type that is neutral against ice and grass. Most electric types, or a lot of different Pokemon really, carry the combination of an electric move and a grass or an ice move, because most ground types are weak to one of those types. Flygon, for example, is immune to electric but ×4 weak to ice. Swampert is immune to electric but ×4 weak to grass. Camerupt is a rare example of a ground type that is neutral to both of the most common coverage types for electric Pokemon. And this means that Camerupt has a path to hit the field. Camerupt is a rare Pokemon that can safely switch in against Zapdos, Jolteon, and Gengar. And it is pretty excellent at doing so, despite its poor defenses, despite all of its shortcomings. All of these Pokemon aren't carrying the things that hit Camerupt. They don't use water coverage, they don't use ground type attacks, and Gengar's Will-O-Wisp won't even hit Camerupt. The best they can hope is hitting you with weak ice or grass type attacks that don't do much damage to you. And when you hit the field against these Pokemon, you can kind of regain momentum in an instant. Camerupt, despite not having elite level offensive stats or anything, is a little bit of a threat. Fire Ground are very good offensive types, and you have the privilege of running mixed coverage. You run Earthquake for your ground type attack, and Fire Blast or Overheat for your fire type attack, which are high power attacks that make up for your below average special attack stat. Gengar can scarcely stay in, and neither can Jolteon. Jolteon gets devastated by Earthquake. Zapdos probably hates taking a huge fire type attack. And Camerupt also conveniently has the move Explosion, which is just a really powerful attack that is able to trade with enemies. This might be your path to eliminating an incoming water type. Swampert is tempted to come in against Camerupt. That seems like a fantastic matchup. Whoops, explosion. You don't have a Swampert anymore. How are you going to answer my Tyranitar now? Camerupt has just lured in the enemy's most important defensive piece and taken it out. If you want to really ruin Swampert's life, you can also run Hidden Power Grass, since it's such a common switch-in that works a lot of the time. A lot of players are fond of Toxic as an option on Camerupt because most switch-ins are going to suffer from being poisoned, including Swampert, Suicune, Flygon, even Salamence. Salamence does resist all of your attacks and is immune to ground, but Toxic will kind of ruin Salamence's life, won't it? Now, Camerupt, of course, still has the dreadful scenario where either Zapdos or Jolteon could click the move Baton Pass and just instantly pivot to Dugtrio and eliminate you, if they are carrying Dugtrio. And that unfortunately does happen pretty commonly, but a lot of the time it doesn't. A lot of the time you get Camerupt in and you get a little bit of short-term momentum. A problem is that once you've shown the Camerupt, the enemy is privy to it and they may not play into it. Your Camerupt is also not going to stick around very long, just by definition, because of how frail it is, how slow it is, and the limited good matchups it has. So this is going to work once and you're going to get a lot of value out of it, and you better use it well because you pretty much only get one shot. But this is still definitely a very unique set of traits that Camerupt is filling here, and genuine high-level Gen 3 players have used this and had success with it. You're not going to see this every day, of course, but it is one of my favorite niche Pokemon choices in Gen 3, and it's such a fun bit of trivia that Camerupt is actually somewhat viable in an OU format, despite seemingly everything working against it in its inherent design. It's amazing that this has found a place to exist anywhere, I think. Up next is the Pokemon Moltres, which might surprise you to hear this, because Moltres has some competitive success under its belt. Moltres is not a bad Pokemon. This guy's an OU ranked threat in Gen 3. In Gen 9 it's had a bit of a renaissance as well. But there was a period where Moltres was suffering from so many weaknesses that it seemed impossible to use competitively. Impossible. Many have forgotten about this stage, but it started in Gen 4 when, of course, the new mechanic of Stealth Rock was introduced, a new entry hazard that caused damage to your Pokemon on entry based on how weak they are to rock. And if a Pokemon is ×4 weak to rock, they take half of their health as soon as they hit the field. This was crippling to many Pokemon that were formerly viable, and one of the most significantly affected Pokemon was Moltres, OU in just the last generation, and significantly affected in its viability in Gen 4. An absolute shell of its former self, because Stealth Rock is so easy to set on the field, and it devastates Moltres to such an extent that it's impossible to justify using it almost. But this is even worse in Gen 5, wouldn't you say? Because in Gen 5, Stealth Rock is still here, it's still just as central to the game. And also, you know what else is here? Permanent Rain. They decided to give Politoed, a little frog, the same ability that Kyogre has, Drizzle, for a funny joke or something. And upon doing this, they completely shifted the entire metagame, and permanent rain teams were now a thing in OU for the first time. As were other permanent weather effects, of course, like Ninetales with its Drought. So not only does Moltres have to worry about rock type, but there's a bunch of rain teams running around, and rain boosts the power of water and nerfs the power of fire. And Moltres, if it was perhaps praying to live a water type attack, what if rain is up, which it often is? Plus the rise of rain threats like Keldeo and Gyarados, boosted by rain, and Thunderous Therian, who has a perfectly accurate thunder and destroys Moltres. I mean, it seems like the worst possible environment for Moltres to do anything. So wouldn't you call me crazy to suggest that Moltres is not only actually viable sometimes in Gen 5 OU, but the place that players use Moltres is on rain teams. This fire-flying type Pokemon that seems like it absolutely doesn't want rain on the field in any context is deliberately used on a team that sets rain itself, which seems completely illogical, completely crazy, but it's the truth, I promise. There's evidence that this is the case. Yes, even though rain teams set Rain on the field, which boosts the power of water and nerfs the damage of fire. Rain teams are also the best teams in the game at clearing hazards, because Rain teams have access to the Pokemon Tentacruel, who is at the peak of its power in Gen 5. Tentacruel is a Rapid Spinner. Rapid Spin is a move that removes entry hazards, which is great to get rid of Stealth Rock and support your Moltres. And Tentacruel is one of the most common Pokemon on Rain teams because of its ability Rain Dish, which basically gives it an extra Leftovers heal every turn. If Rain is up, it gains the same amount that Leftovers heals in HP every turn, which stacks with a Black Sludge, and it gives Tentacruel a significant amount of longevity. With Substitute and Protect, Tentacruel is incredibly sturdy, and it's the most consistent Rapid Spinner in the game. It's incredibly bulky and reliable, and it's a common teammate to run with Pokemon that hate hazards. They want hazards gone no matter what. Tentacruel is usually the guy for the job in that case, and Moltres, while it doesn't love Rain being up necessarily, does love having Tentacruel as an ally. Moltres and Tentacruel get along swimmingly, you could say. On top of this wonderful little synergy, Moltres actually does get a bit of a benefit from Rain being on the field, because Moltres doesn't always have to use Fire-type attacks. In Gen 5, Moltres has access to the move Hurricane, an incredibly powerful Flying-type attack with 120 power. Usually it has the drawback of only 70 accuracy, which is very bad, but in the Rain, Hurricane is perfectly accurate. So with this combination of fantastic spinner support from Tentacruel and access to this perfectly accurate Hurricane, which is actually one of the best attacks in the game in Gen 5 because of Rain synergy and because flying is so widely threatening. Turns out that Moltres, despite, seeming to not love the existence of Rain, actually benefits greatly from Rain. It gets more synergy from Rain than Sun, amazingly. And believe it or not, Moltres actually provides some pretty nice defensive merit to Rain teams. Because Rain teams obviously match up poorly against Grass types. I mean, wouldn't take a genius to tell you that, wouldn't it? Water is weak to Grass, and Grass resists water. It's not fun to see good Grass types on the enemy team when you're running a Rain team, but Moltres is a Fire Flying type. It has a ×4 resistance to Grass, and Hurricane is super effective against Grass. So some bad matchups for Rain, like Breloom, who is water resistant and has Poison Heal to dodge Scald Burns. Moltres kind of destroys Breloom. It switches in, devastates it with Hurricane, and Moltres can also take the opportunity to substitute in the face of Breloom, and it resists both Grass and Fighting. It can take significant advantage of Breloom, and with a substitute up, the switch in on the enemy team is also going to be taking Hurricanes and Will-O-Wisps, and even succumbing to the effects of pressure, Moltres' ability, which stores double the amount of PP whenever it's hit by an attack. So Moltres is actually pretty fantastic at patching up some of Rain's worst matchups. Not only Breloom, but Ferrothorn. Ferrothorn is extremely common, and Moltres happens to switch in very comfortably against both Power Whip and Gyro Ball, substitute in Ferrothorn's face, and live behind the substitute, and then start shooting off Hurricanes, and putting the enemy in an incredibly awkward position from there. Now this of course is not going to be a common option on every single team. It has its shortcomings too, as Pokemon like Ferrothorn and Breloom can run options to catch the Moltres, like Rock Tomb, Stun Spore, or in the case of Ferrothorn, Thunder Wave, or Knockoff. But this is still perhaps the best way to use Moltres in Gen 5, and it's something that I was shocked to learn about when I first saw it. It seems completely paradoxical that a Moltres would thrive on Rain teams in Gen 5. It's just a made-up sounding sentence, but it's the entire truth, and I think it's a pretty cool quirk that of all the places where Moltres could succeed, it's on a Gen 5 Rain team, despite literal Rain being on the field and Stealth Rock being such a glaring weakness. So there you go. I bet you didn't know about that one, did you? Moltres Rain. And finally we have perhaps the most unbelievable example of this phenomenon on the whole list. Leavanny is a Pokemon that I almost feel bad listing all of its shortcomings because I don't think that anyone intended for this to be a Pokemon that you bring to tournaments or that even engages in combat at all. This is a funny joke of a Pokemon. It's one of many average bug types that don't really do much. It is a bug grass typing, which is a contender for worst typing in the game. It is times 4 weak to fire and flying. It is weak to rock, which is of course incredibly damning in a world with stealth rock, and in general, just because rock type attacks are common. It's also weak to ice, and I think it's also weak to bug. I don't think bug resists itself. Oh, and it's also weak to poison if there wasn't enough drawbacks. And the Pokemon stats are about as average as you can get. The highest peak here is 103 in the attack stat, which is just not gonna cut it, especially in Generation 9. The Pokemon is ranked as EU, which is the lowest possible rank a Pokemon can get. So it absolutely amazed and shocked everyone when in Gen 9 OU, a Leavanny team, an earnest Leavanny team, achieved a top 10 ladder position in the entire world. The player Ozma made history by showing the world that yes, Leavanny actually has some competitive merit. I don't think anybody expected this. Leavanny does have two noteworthy advantages up its sleeve. First is the ability Chlorophyll. This is a fantastic ability, granting double speed in the sun, and a lot of Pokemon have made great use of this ability over the years in competitive singles. Leavanny is of course an incredibly undesirable Chlorophyll Pokemon, you would think, but what's unique about Leavanny is that it's a Chlorophyll Pokemon that has access to Sticky Web as well. A Sticky Web is a very rarely seen entry hazard, usually only on bug types and very few others, and it's an entry hazard that lowers speed of grounded enemies by 1 on switch in. And it's a great entry hazard at enabling offensive teams, because most of the time you're going to outrun them if they are stepping on this Sticky Web every time and lowering their speed. So Leavanny does have a bit of roll compression going on here. It is a Chlorophyll Pokemon that can set Sticky Web, and it can do so quickly with speed thanks to Ninetales as a teammate to set Sun. Now there's the problem of how do you actually do any damage with Leavanny, so a good option here is Leaf Storm, a high power grass type attack, which actually does hit a lot of cool targets in Gen 9 OU like Great Tusk and Dondozo. And Leavanny can actually use Leaf Storm alongside the item Eject Pack for a bit of a one-time pivot. Leaf Storm's drawback for its high power is that it lowers your special attack by 2, and the Eject Pack is an item that activates if any stat has been lowered. So the Eject Pack will activate right after you lose Leaf Storm, and then it will allow you to switch out of the field, like a pivoting move, like U-turn. So once per game, Leavanny can do a big Leaf Storm and then pivot out. It's actually a pretty good sequence. You make your Sticky Web, you hit him with a huge Leaf Storm, and this is an aggressive Sun team that really benefits from a momentum play like that, a pivot into maybe the Walking Wake, which now is much scarier. Leavanny also happens to have some useful coverage for the meta. Triple Axle is a newer option, an Ice-type attack that hits 3 times, with each hit raising in power. Ice-type coverage complements Grass well, and of course hits Gliscor and Landorus Therian super effectively, among many others like Dragonite. Crucially, you also hit Dragonite through multi-scale because of the multi-hit effect. Low Kick is another option, a fighting-type attack that scales based on the enemy's weight. And this does great damage to King Gambit and enemies like Tinglu, perhaps the occasional Blissey. So Leavanny is really the only Pokemon in the whole game with this specific combination of things, and if a Pokemon has a specific enough niche, you can build around it and get stuff out of it. Leavanny here is making Sticky Web, which benefits the Walking Wake and the Ceruledge. It's pivoting, which benefits everything on the team. And it's also kind of a backup answer to enemies like Dragonite, Gliscor, King Gambit. Its typing is also sort of useful because it can switch in against Great Tusk and some water types. It can switch in on Iron Treads. So amazingly, Leavanny found something to do. It has some advantages, and it is using its advantages to the maximum potential on this team, to such an extent that the team hit number 10, amazing everyone. Now, technically this team is now illegal because Roaring Moon has since been banned, but I'm sure Roaring Moon could be deleted and substituted for something else here, and the team would function, possibly in the newer metagame. And the ban of Roaring Moon doesn't change the fact that this was a monumental team that surprised and impressed the entire Pokemon world. And it's perhaps the most significant example of a Pokemon with such atrocious drawbacks somehow finding a way to be viable competitively. It's certainly the most insane example that I've seen, in my opinion. Which is your favorite Pokemon I talked about today? Was it Leavanny? Possibly it was. You are your own person with your own beliefs. Let me know down below in the comments, and thank you very much for watching.